Can a king's strange desires, twisted betrayals, and humiliating private life truly bring down an entire nation? Spain, in the early 19th century, was a country torn apart, its empire collapsing, its people in revolt, and its throne occupied by a man both worshipped and despised. He was hailed as El Deseado, the Desired One, but later damned as El Rey, the Felon King. This is the story of Ferdinand VII of Spain, a ruler whose reign blended scandal, political disaster, sexual humiliation, and civil war. From betraying his own father to scandalizing his wives to plunging Spain into chaos that sparked decades of bloodshed, Ferdinand's life reads like a cautionary tale of what happens when absolute power rests in unworthy hands. And yes, he was also remembered for having one of the most grotesque royal deformities in history, an unsightly anatomy that made his private life just as disastrous as his public one. So, why was Ferdinand called both the Desired One and the Felon King? Tonight, we unravel the shocking rise, fall, and ruin of Spain's most infamous monarch. Born into toxic royalty, Ferdinand VII was born on October 14, 1784. In El Escorial, the grand palace monastery that symbolized Spain's fading imperial glory. As the eldest surviving son of King Charles IV and Queen Maria Luisa of Parma, Ferdinand was destined to inherit one of the largest empires in the world, stretching across Europe, the Americas, and Asia. But the royal household he entered was no nursery of love. It was a powder keg of rivalries, mistrust, and open hostility. At the center of this storm was Ferdinand's mother, Maria Luisa. Notorious for her sharp tongue and iron grip on court politics, she openly favored her lover, Manuel Godoy, Spain's prime minister. Godoy had risen from the royal guard to become the most powerful man in Spain, thanks to Maria Luisa's affection. Charles IV, meanwhile, was a weak monarch, more interested in hunting than governing. Real power rested in the hands of his wife and her lover. And where did this leave Ferdinand? Nowhere. His mother distrusted him, openly despised him, and treated him with cold contempt. Godoy worked tirelessly to sideline the young prince, keeping him away from politics and even threatening to disinherit him. This childhood of rejection, humiliation, and exclusion bred in Ferdinand two defining traits: an obsession with power and a willingness to betray anyone to seize it. The betrayal at El Escorial. By the early 1800s, Ferdinand was no longer a sulking boy, he was a young man burning with resentment. Godoy's dominance at court, combined with Spain's humiliating defeats against Britain and France, made the prime minister despised across the kingdom. Sensing opportunity, Ferdinand and his circle plotted what became the El Escorial conspiracy of 1807, the plan nothing less than to overthrow his own father. Ferdinand secretly reached out to Napoleon Bonaparte, offering to ally with France in exchange for help removing Godoy and forcing Charles IV to abdicate. Yes, you heard that right. The Prince of Spain was willing to betray his father and hand Spain's throne to Napoleon's mercy. But the plot failed. Godoy uncovered the conspiracy, and guards stormed Ferdinand's chambers, discovering incriminating letters. The scandal rocked the monarchy. Ferdinand was arrested. Facing ruin, he crumbled. To save himself, he betrayed his allies, naming every conspirator. He even wrote groveling letters to his parents, begging to kiss their feet in forgiveness. Miraculously, he was pardoned. Public hatred for Godoy made it too risky to punish Ferdinand harshly. For the first time, but not the last, Spain's future king learned he could betray, humiliate himself, and still come out ahead. The people's king. For a moment in 1808, Spain exploded. The tumult of Aranjuez saw angry mobs, encouraged by factions loyal to Ferdinand, storm the royal palace. Godoy was arrested, Charles IV forced to abdicate, and Ferdinand was hailed as Spain's new monarch. For a brief moment, he was El Deseado, the Desired One. Crowds cheered him as a savior, but Napoleon had other plans. Invited to Bayonne in France, Ferdinand was tricked into surrendering his crown. Napoleon handed Spain instead to his brother, Joseph Bonaparte. Ferdinand spent the next 6 years as a pampered prisoner at Chateau de Valniquet, dining well and walking in gardens while his people bled in the Peninsular War. By 1814, Spain expelled the French. When Ferdinand returned, he was welcomed like a hero. He promised to honor the liberal constitution of 1812, which limited royal power, but within weeks he tore it up. He abolished the constitution, arrested liberals, restored absolute monarchy, and reintroduced censorship and repression. The people's savior had revealed his true face, El Rey. The scandals behind palace walls. If Ferdinand's politics were disastrous, his private life was equally grotesque. He became infamous for his abnormal anatomy, described by contemporaries as freakish, grotesquely oversized, and misshapen. Intimacy was so difficult that he required a special cushion during intercourse. Far from pride, it was humiliation and endless source of suffering for his wives. Maria Antonia of Naples, his first wife, repelled by him, suffered miscarriages, died at 21 amid rumors of poisoning. Maria Isabella of Portugal, his second wife, died in horror during childbirth when doctors mistakenly performed a C-section while she was still alive, screaming as she was cut open. Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, his third wife, a deeply religious girl of 16, terrified on her wedding night. She refused him until the Pope personally urged her to consummate the marriage. She died childless at 25. Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, his fourth wife, shrewd and determined. She bore him 2 daughters, but this only triggered a succession crisis. Since the law allowed only males to inherit behind closed doors, Ferdinand's marriages were marked by fear, pain, and tragedy. A king who lost an empire while Ferdinand obsessed over control at home. Spain's colonies abroad were breaking free. From Argentina to Mexico, independence movements swept through Latin America. Ferdinand's refusal to compromise his demand for total submission only accelerated the collapse. By the mid-1820s, 20s, Spain had lost nearly all of its vast empire, reduced to a shadow: Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. At home, Ferdinand leaned on foreign armies to crush dissent. In 1823, he invited French troops, the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis, to restore his absolute power. Spaniards saw this as treason, a king who needed foreigners to rule his own people. By now, his nickname El Rey was infamous. Death and civil war. By the early 1830s, Ferdinand was dying. He had only daughters, but Spain's succession law allowed only males. To secure his bloodline, he issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, naming his eldest daughter Isabella the second heir. This enraged his brother, Don Carlos, whose supporters, the Carlists, refused to accept Isabella. When Ferdinand died on September 29, 1833, Spain immediately plunged into the First Carlist War, a brutal civil conflict that would rage for years, killing tens of thousands and leaving the nation divided for generations. Ferdinand's last gift to Spain was not peace or prosperity, but civil war. Legacy of a felon king. Ferdinand VII's reign is remembered as one of the darkest in Spanish history. He betrayed his own father. He crushed the hopes of liberals who had fought for freedom. He oversaw the loss of Spain's empire. He humiliated his wives and turned his private life into whispered scandal. And he left behind a kingdom torn by civil war. Historians call him Spain's worst monarch, a man whose deformities were not only physical but moral, whose selfishness and cowardice doomed a nation. Ferdinand VII was once El Decido, the desired one, but history remembers him as El Rey, the felon king. Proof that sometimes the greatest danger to a nation is the man who wears its crown.